Chapter 23. Between my hammer, the demolition screwdriver, and my newly enhanced athleticism, I made short work of the lab coat at Shithead. I didn't try to sneak around any of the other techs, though. I'd learned my lesson and had no plans to make the mistake again. Instead, I followed in the wake of Croc's murderous rampage, staying a few aisles over as the mimic drew the techs out. Firebombs flew from the shadows as the disgruntled dwellers tried to murder the dog bear, not that they could. The mimic was a friggin' tank who could brush off damage like water rolling off a duck's back. But their fixation on Croc did leave them susceptible to my stealth attacks. I kept my distance and clung to the shadows, then launched bleach bolts with sniper-like precision. The corrosive orbs melted through their fluttering lab coats and chewed through any exposed skin, killing the techs in the span of 30 seconds or less. The triple damage bonus certainly helped get the job done in record time. For those few who survived the initial bleach bolt blast, I quickly followed up with either a mana-enforced hammer blow to the head or a demolition screwdriver to the kidney. The screwdriver's bloodletting effect was devastatingly effective, and my hammer's gavel ability turned those with low health into red smears on the linoleum. Did I feel a little cowardly, stabbing them while they had their backs turned? No. Not even a little. Screw these assholes. I didn't have anything to prove to anyone, and this wasn't some kind of game, no matter that there were stats and floating, 8-bit prompt boxes. This was life and death. This was war, and I'd use every tool at my disposal. It took me and Croc about 15 minutes to dispatch the rest of the techs and another 15 minutes for me to make the rounds and mark the legion of traps with spray paint. We still weren't done yet, though. We hadn't run across any dweller over level 10, nor had we received any sort of achievement notice for completing the job board posting, and I was sure my douchebag localized administrator wouldn't pass up an opportunity like that. Besides, there was still one section of the store we hadn't even touched yet. The pharmacy itself. I suspected there would be more of the pyromaniac techs hidden away behind the plexiglass-encased counter along with the store manager who called the shots around here. But I wasn't prepared to charge headlong into the final boss battle just yet. We were close to the finish line, and I saw no reason to rush things, since we had the time to catch our breath and recuperate. Croc and I took the brief reprieve to systematically clear the rest of the store, giving the pharmacy a wide berth. Whatever was hiding away back there seemed content to leave us be, so long as we stayed away from its lair. My mana and stamina were both low from the initial push, and Croc had taken some nasty physical damage, including a few burns that turned its blue, rubbery body into a massive charred flesh and writhing tentacles. It seemed there was a limit to the amount of damage the mimic could absorb before it started to affect the creature's shape-shifting ability. Croc had a much higher health regeneration factor than I did, but even taking that into consideration, there was no way the dog would be fully healed in time to take on the store manager. So, even though I was reluctant to part with it, I cracked the lesser healing Zima and forced the mimic to drink the restorative elixir. Croc protested, of course, but when I told it that friends didn't let friends suffer from catastrophic internal hemorrhaging, the dog's googly eyes teared up and it reluctantly drank. I would literally die for you, Croc declared solemnly once it had emptied the Zima. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, I grunted, though I was begrudgingly glad to have the dog around. It was nice not being alone. While my mana slowly ticked back to full, I took a little extra time to loot the dead dwellers for anything that might come in handy for the battle against Mediocremart's big bad. Like maybe some of those fire bombs the techs had been hurling at us. Erlenmeyer's Molotov cocktail. Uncommon relic, level 1. Range, line of sight. Duration, 5 minutes. Cost, 8 mana. Marrying the principles of basic high school chemistry with the arcane powers of bored pharmacy techs, Erlenmeyer's Molotov cocktail is a one-way ticket to Arsonville, population U. All targets take 15 points of fire damage on contact, plus 5 points of additional burn damage per minute while within the area of effect. Just remember, fire is an equal opportunity force of devastation. You're just as likely to accidentally burn down your detached two-car garage as you are to kill your enemies. Not only was it an uncommon relic, but it was quick, dirty, and dealt out a metric buttload of damage for the amount of mana it consumed. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to control the effects with any kind of precision. It was, well, the magical equivalent of a Molotov cocktail. It'd be great in an open area like the main floor of the mall, but inside the tight confines of the pharmacy? It was possible that I could end up accidentally killing myself if I wasn't extremely careful. I still planned on using it, because only a moron or a jackass passes up a potential weapon like that, even if it was incredibly reckless and more than a little suicidal. But it turned out, I didn't need to worry at all. The Molotov cocktail had synergistic compatibility with my Bleach Bolt relic. Under normal circumstances, I never would have forged the two techniques into one. Bleach Bolt was my best spell by a landslide, and there was no telling what the end product would be. Except, I had Researcher's Codex, so I knew exactly what I'd end up with. Bleach Blaze. It had all the same effects as the original Bleach Bolt relic, but with new and improved, melt-your-face-off fire damage. Upgrading the relic transformed it from an uncommon ability into a rare one and added 5 points of fire damage per minute while simultaneously draining stamina by 10 points a minute for 5 minutes. There were a couple of drawbacks, though. The biggest of which was that the relic level dropped from 4 to 2, which gutted the overall corrosive damage. Still, I was sure I'd get that extra damage over time, back once I leveled up the ability a little more. It also doubled the mana cost from 5 to 10, which hurt more than I wanted to admit. We picked up 5 more of the Erlenmeyer's Molotov cocktail relics, as well as a mix of common and uncommon shards, and I briefly considered sacrificing the whole lot of them to bump Bleach Blaze up to level 3, but ultimately decided against it. The added level boost might give me a few more extra points of damage output, but I had a feeling that the uncommon fireball relics would fetch a premium from new delvers once I got my storefront up and running. Besides, even without the extra levels, Bleach Blaze still dished out 58 total points of combined elemental damage, which was more than enough to take out most of the dwellers we'd tangled with so far, though I doubted it would be enough to kill the store manager in charge of the mediocre mart. But I had a few other plans brewing on that front. The nightmarish photophage, who'd nearly devoured me like a hungry anaconda, also had a relic called Sleep Paralysis Demon, which resembled the hunched form of a palm-sized stone gargoyle. It was a hypnotic, sonic attack that did exactly what it sounded like, paralyzed onlookers for a short period of time. I'd experienced the full force of that relic firsthand, so I knew how powerful it could be. I wasn't at all surprised to find that it had a synergistic resonance with my psychedelic light show of minor distraction, though I was surprised to see that it also resonated with my tinfoil hat of mind shielding. The 3 items together pulsed and vibrated, but there was something subtly off-key about the frequency of that discordant hum. Upon closer examination, I started to figure out why. Researcher's Codex Compatibility Analysis. Based on historic datasets and extensive forging models, Sleep Paralysis Demon, common, level 1, and Tinfoil Hat of Mind Shielding, common, level 1, have an estimated 69% resonance compatibility, meaning the number of possible relic iterations is low to medium. The most probable outcome is the Calendar of Mind Shielding, common, or a closely adjacent derivative. Sleep Paralysis Demon, common, level 1, and Psychedelic Light Show of Minor Distraction, uncommon, level 1, have an estimated 83% resonance compatibility, meaning the number of possible relic iterations is low. The most probable outcome is Bad Trip, uncommon, or a closely adjacent derivative. Sleep Paralysis Demon, common, level 1, Tinfoil Hat of Mind Shielding, common, level 1, and Psychedelic Light Show of Minor Distraction, uncommon, level 1, have an estimated 17% resonance compatibility, meaning the number of possible relic iterations is high. With such a low resonance compatibility, creating a predictive forging model is not possible at this time and the end result will likely be unfavorable. Would you like to view additional report records for Calendar of Mind Shielding or Bad Trip? Yes, no? As I read over the detail reports for both relics, I immediately saw the problem with trying to combine all 3. The colander offered passive sonic resistance, while Bad Trip was an offensive spell. The sleep paralysis demon could, apparently, augment either of my other two relics, but smashing them all together would create a bipolar relic that didn't know what it was supposed to do. Which meant I'd wind up with something worthless like so many of the relics I'd already stumbled across in the mall. After a little careful consideration, I decided that the offensive relic would be more likely to help me to survive the next few hours, so that's what I went with. Bad Trip. Uncommon relic, level 1. Range, line of sight. Cost, 5-40 mana. Duration, 15 seconds. Bad Trip allows you to conjure between 1 and 8 illusionary blacklight wisps that will swirl through the air in a whirlwind of psychedelic brilliance. But not all trips down the rabbit hole are good ones. Any creature with a perception lower than yours will see their worst fears manifested inside the blacklight wisps. Those afflicted have a 10% chance of suffering from paralyzing fear, immobilizing them on the spot for 20 seconds. The chance of triggering paralyzing fear increases by 10% for each additional blacklight wisp you summon. With my two new relics equipped to my spatial core, the traps all spray-painted and marked on my map, and my mana and stamina topped off, it was time to venture into the pharmacy and put this mission to rest. "You ready?" I asked Croc stoically, checking my tool belt, then examining the handful of other items I'd created in preparation for this fight. "You'll tell me all about water parks once this is done?" the dog asked hopefully. "Everything you could possibly want to know," I agreed, "and probably a few things you didn't. Like how people routinely pee in the pool." Croc didn't seem deterred in the least. "I've never been more ready in my life." Metal rollaway screens had been pulled down, and a dark gray employees-only door separated the pharmacy from the rest of the store. The last time I'd gone through a door like that, I'd ended up in a fight for my life against the janitorial stairwell guardian, and I had a feeling this was going to be no different. Taking one more deep breath, I kicked open the door with a booted foot and rushed in with Croc close on my heels. Chapter 24. I knew we were in trouble the second we rushed through the door. Half a dozen of the crow-faced pharmacy techs loitered about the room, waiting in ambush. Towering above them was a rail-thin figure wearing a long black cassock beneath a tattered lab coat with a bandolier studded with colorful glass orbs, which ran from shoulder to hip. Cold black eyes regarded me and Croc through steampunk-like goggles and said into a black leather-plagued doctor mask with a cruel raven. Chapter 23. Between my hammer, the demolition screwdriver, and my newly enhanced athleticism, I made short work of the lab-coated shithead. I didn't try to sneak around any of the other techs, though. I'd learned my lesson and had no plans to make that mistake again. Instead, I followed in the wake of Croc's murderous rampage, staying a few aisles over as the mimic drew the techs out. Firebombs flew from the shadows as the disgruntled dwellers tried to murder the dog bear, not that they could. The mimic was a friggin' tank who could brush off damage like water rolling off a duck's back. But their fixation on Croc did leave them susceptible to my stealth attacks. I kept my distance and clung to the shadows, then launched bleach bolts with sniper-like precision. The corrosive orbs melted through their fluttering lab coats and chewed through any exposed skin, killing the techs in the span of 30 seconds or less. The triple damage bonus certainly helped get the job done in record time. For those few who survived the initial bleach bolt blast, I quickly followed up with either a mana-enforced hammer blow to the head or a demolition screwdriver to the kidney. The screwdriver's bloodletting effect was devastatingly effective, and my hammer's gavel ability turned those with low health into red smears on the linoleum. Did I feel a little cowardly, stabbing them while they had their backs turned? No. Not even a little. Screw these assholes. I didn't have anything to prove to anyone, and this wasn't some kind of game, no matter that there were stats and floating, 8-bit prompt boxes. This was life and death. This was war, and I'd use every tool at my disposal. It took me and Croc about 15 minutes to dispatch the rest of the techs and another 15 minutes for me to make the rounds and mark the legion of traps with spray paint. We still weren't done yet, though. We hadn't run across any dweller over level 10, nor had we received any sort of achievement notice for completing the job board posting, and I was sure my douchebag localized administrator wouldn't pass up an opportunity like that. Besides, there was still one section of the store we hadn't even touched yet. The pharmacy itself. I suspected there would be more of the pyromaniac techs hidden away behind the plexiglass-encased counter along with the store manager who called the shots around here. But I wasn't prepared to charge headlong into the final boss battle just yet. We were close to the finish line, and I saw no reason to rush things, since we had the time to catch our breath and recuperate. Croc and I took the brief reprieve to systematically clear the rest of the store, giving the pharmacy a wide berth. Whatever was hiding away back there seemed content to leave us be, so long as we stayed away from its lair. My mana and stamina were both low from the initial push, and Croc had taken some nasty physical damage, including a few burns that turned its blue, rubbery body into a massive charred flesh and writhing tentacles. It seemed there was a limit to the amount of damage the mimic could absorb before it started to affect the creature's shape-shifting ability. Croc had a much higher health regeneration factor than I did, but even taking that into consideration, there was no way the dog would be fully healed in time to take on the store manager. So, even though I was reluctant to part with it, I cracked the lesser healing Zima and forced the mimic to drink the restorative elixir. Croc protested, of course, but when I told it that friends didn't let friends suffer from catastrophic internal hemorrhaging, the dog's googly eyes teared up and it reluctantly drank. I would literally die for you, Croc declared solemnly once it had emptied the Zima. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, I grunted, though I was begrudgingly glad to have the dog around. It was nice not being alone. While my mana slowly ticked back to full, I took a little extra time to loot the dead dwellers for anything that might come in handy for the battle against Mediocremart's big bad. Like maybe some of those fire bombs the techs had been hurling at us. Erlenmeyer's Molotov cocktail. Uncommon relic, level 1. Range, line of sight. Duration, 5 minutes. Cost, 8 mana. Marrying the principles of basic high school chemistry with the arcane powers of bored pharmacy techs, Erlenmeyer's Molotov cocktail is a one-way ticket to Arsonville, population U. All targets take 15 points of fire damage on contact, plus 5 points of additional burn damage per minute while within the area of effect. Just remember, fire is an equal opportunity force of devastation. You're just as likely to accidentally burn down your detached two-car garage as you are to kill your enemies. Not only was it an uncommon relic, but it was quick, dirty, and dealt out a metric buttload of damage for the amount of mana it consumed. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to control the effects with any kind of precision. It was, well, the magical equivalent of a Molotov cocktail. It'd be great in an open area like the main floor of the mall, but inside the tight confines of the pharmacy? It was possible that I could end up accidentally killing myself if I wasn't extremely careful. I still planned on using it, because only a moron or a jackass passes up a potential weapon like that, even if it was incredibly reckless and more than a little suicidal. But it turned out, I didn't need to worry at all. The Molotov cocktail had synergistic compatibility with my Bleach Bolt relic. Under normal circumstances, I never would have forged the two techniques into one. Bleach Bolt was my best spell by a landslide, and there was no telling what the end product would be. Except, I had Researcher's Codex, so I knew exactly what I'd end up with. Bleach Blaze. It had all the same effects as the original Bleach Bolt relic, but with new and improved, melt-your-face-off fire damage. Upgrading the relic transformed it from an uncommon ability into a rare one and added 5 points of fire damage per minute while simultaneously draining stamina by 10 points a minute for 5 minutes. There were a couple of drawbacks, though. The biggest of which was that the relic level dropped from 4 to 2, which gutted the overall corrosive damage. Still, I was sure I'd get that extra damage over time, back once I leveled up the ability a little more. It also doubled the mana cost from 5 to 10, which hurt more than I wanted to admit. We picked up 5 more of the Erlenmeyer's Molotov cocktail relics, as well as a mix of common and uncommon shards, and I briefly considered sacrificing the whole lot of them to bump Bleach Blaze up to level 3, but ultimately decided against it. The added level boost might give me a few more extra points of damage output, but I had a feeling that the uncommon fireball relics would fetch a premium from new delvers once I got my storefront up and running. Besides, even without the extra levels, Bleach Blaze still dished out 58 total points of combined elemental damage, which was more than enough to take out most of the dwellers we'd tangled with so far, though I doubted it would be enough to kill the store manager in charge of the mediocre mart. But I had a few other plans brewing on that front. The nightmarish photophage, who nearly devoured me like a hungry anaconda, also had a relic called Sleep Paralysis Demon, which resembled the hunched form of a palm-sized stone gargoyle. It was a hypnotic, sonic attack that did exactly what it sounded like, paralyzed onlookers for a short period of time. I'd experienced the full force of that relic firsthand, so I knew how powerful it could be. I wasn't at all surprised to find that it had a synergistic resonance with my psychedelic light show of minor distraction, though I was surprised to see that it also resonated with my tinfoil hat of mind shielding. The three items together pulsed and vibrated, but there was something subtly off-key about the frequency of that discordant hum. Upon closer examination, I started to figure out why. Researchers' Codex Compatibility Analysis. Based on historic datasets and extensive forging models, Sleep Paralysis Demon, Common, Level 1, and Tinfoil Hat of Mind Shielding, Common, Level 1, have an estimated 69% resonance compatibility, meaning the number of possible relic iterations is low to medium. The most probable outcome is the Calendar of Mind Shielding, Common, or a closely adjacent derivative. Sleep Paralysis Demon, Common, Level 1, and Psychedelic Light Show of Minor Distraction, Uncommon, Level 1, have an estimated 83% resonance compatibility, meaning the number of possible relic iterations is low. The most probable outcome is Bad Trip, Uncommon, or a closely adjacent derivative. Sleep Paralysis Demon, Common, Level 1, Tinfoil Hat of Mind Shielding, Common, Level 1, and Psychedelic Light Show of Minor Distraction, Uncommon, Level 1, have an estimated 17% resonance compatibility, meaning the number of possible relic iterations is high. With such a low resonance compatibility, creating a predictive forging model is not possible at this time, and the end result will likely be unfavorable. Would you like to view additional report records for Calendar of Mind Shielding or Bad Trip? Yes, no? As I read over the detail reports for both relics, I immediately saw the problem with trying to combine all three. The Calendar offered passive sonic resistance, while Bad Trip was an offensive spell. The Sleep Paralysis Demon could, apparently, augment either of my other two relics, but smashing them all together would create a bipolar relic that didn't know what it was supposed to do. Which meant I'd wind up with something worthless like so many of the relics I'd already stumbled across in the mall. After a little careful consideration, I decided that the offensive relic would be more likely to help me to survive the next few hours, so that's what I went with. Bad Trip. Uncommon relic, Level 1. Range, Line of Sight. Cost, 5-40 mana. Duration, 15 seconds. Bad Trip allows you to conjure between 1 and 8 illusionary blacklight wisps that will swirl through the air in a whirlwind of psychedelic brilliance. But not all trips down the rabbit hole are good ones. Any creature with a perception lower than yours will see their worst fears manifested inside the blacklight wisps. Those afflicted have a 10% chance of suffering from paralyzing fear, immobilizing them on the spot for 20 seconds. The chance of triggering paralyzing fear increases by 10% for each additional blacklight wisp you summon. With my two new relics equipped to my spatial core, the traps all spray-painted and marked on my map, and my mana and stamina topped off, it was time to venture into the pharmacy and put this mission to rest. You ready? I asked Croc stoically, checking my tool belt, then examining the handful of other items I'd created in preparation for this fight. You'll tell me all about water parks once this is done? The dog asked hopefully. Everything you could possibly want to know, I agreed. And probably a few things you didn't. Like how people routinely pee in the pool. Croc didn't seem deterred in the least. I've never been more ready in my life. Metal rollaway screens had been pulled down, and a dark gray employees-only door separated the pharmacy from the rest of the store. The last time I'd gone through a door like that, I'd ended up in a fight for my life against the janitorial stairwell guardian, and I had a feeling this was going to be no different. Taking one more deep breath, I kicked open the door with a booted foot and rushed in with Croc close on my heels. Chapter 24. I knew we were in trouble the second we rushed through the door. Half a dozen of the crow-faced pharmacy techs loitered about the room, waiting in ambush. Towering above them was a rail-thin figure wearing a long black cassock beneath a tattered lab coat with a bandolier studded with colorful glass orbs, which ran from shoulder to hip. Cold black eyes regarded me, and Croc threw Stiampunk-like goggles and said into a black leather plague doctor mask with a cruel raven's beak. The dweller carried an oversized silver revolver, which was already raised and ready to unleash certain death. Dweller 0.3911A, Pharmacist, Store Manager. Blighted, Level 11, 8 years, $100,000 worth of student loans, and for what? For working in the back of a glorified gas station, 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, slinging pills to a bunch of ungrateful shitheads who treat them like part-time McDonald's burger flippers? Here they are, attempting to do a little good for the world by distributing life-saving medicines to anti-vaxxers who believe they are secretly agents of the deep state. Such is the life of a pharmacist. A few years in retail made these guys homicidally crazy long before the blight ever touched them. Jaded by the worst that humanity has to offer, pharmacists are as dead on the inside as you're about to be on the outside. Armed with disease bombs and dirty syringes, they sow contagion like the European rats of 1347. These mean sons of bitches know the human body like the back of their gloved hand. They are doctors after all, so choose wisely before facing off against these avatars of disease and disillusionment. I was moving along before I'd even finished reading through the dweller's description. Even though I'd only been stranded here for less than 2 days, I'd already learned that an ambush was only ever one breath away. I'd come prepared for the possibility. The slammer of shielding hit the floor with a metallic clatter as I screamed the activation incantation, "Let's pog." The golden birdcage blazed into existence, and the 2-minute countdown timer blinked to life in the corner of my eye. Less than a heartbeat later, the raven-beaked plague doctor opened up with a spray of rounds from the oversized revolver. Syringes filled with some sort of black sludge erupted from the end of the barrel, slammed into the invisible force field, then fell harmlessly to the ground. The arcane barrier would prevent a pharmacist and its minions from harming us in any way, but it only provided that protection for 2 minutes and, unfortunately, the protective qualities of the dome worked both ways. Although arcane power couldn't hit me while I was inside, I couldn't launch a magical sneak attack against someone outside the safety dome, either. But there were certain exceptions to that rule, as I'd learned. Hostile dwellers couldn't physically cross the barrier threshold, but I could leave the boundary without deactivating the spell. There might be a way to exploit that to my benefit. Although metaphysical energy was incapable of penetrating the dome from either direction, maybe I could physically hurl things through the defensive barrier without breaking whatever strange laws governed the slammer of shielding. I pulled out a black drywall screw from the pouch at my side and flicked it at the plague doctor with contempt. The screw sailed through the golden dome of energy, unmolested, and smacked against the pharmacist's stupid Stiampunk goggles. It didn't do any damage, but it accomplished its dual purposes all the same. 1. It showed me that I could, in fact, throw material, non-magical items through the barrier even while in active combat, and 2. It pissed the plague doctor off. "Hey dipshit," I called while pulling another pair of items from my storage space. It was a bottle of cheap vodka with a rag sticking out of the top. I couldn't use the Erlenmeyer Molotov cocktail relic while contained within the dome, but this wasn't that. Hell, this wasn't even an artifact. This was just a bottle of booze I'd picked up from the liquor aisle. It had no magic. No special abilities. But good old-fashioned fire is its own special kind of magic, and there was nothing to stop me from fashioning an actual Molotov cocktail. Or several. "This didn't have a price tag on it," I said, lighting the rag with a silver Zippo I'd taken from the front register. "I guess that means it's free," I finished, hurling the bottle. It arsed through the air and crashed near the back of the room, dosing one of the techs in a coat of flames. I pulled a second bottle from thin air and left it one too. Maybe you can price check this one instead. I tossed it on the other side of the room and watched in satisfaction as the flames raced across the shelving units. Red health plates popped up all over the pharmacy as the techs started to slowly burn to death. The whole while, I kept one eye on the timer, sprinting towards 0. 112 remaining. There was some small part of me that was worried about doing so much damage to the store, since I planned to claim it as my own. But this was part of the backrooms, so chances were high that it would heal just the same as the lobby had, given enough time. I pulled out a third bottle, just for good measure, and fastballed it right at the pharmacist's clunky black boots. Tongues of orange and red erupted upward in a whoosh, washing over the lunky dweller. The pharmacist just stood there, wreathed in flames, and watched me with hate burning in the dark eyes behind its goofy goggles. Its status plate appeared, HP 87/90ths, MP 120/125ths, but it hardly flickered at all. "Your store sucks a bag of dicks, and the lines are too long," I hollered, flipping the pharmacist the bird before slowly retreating through the door. I wanted to pull the door shut and jam it, but the door swung inward, so that wouldn't be possible. I did the next best thing. Dropping to a knee, I wedged my speed square beneath the frame of the door so it wouldn't close. The steady inrush of oxygen would feed the flames, and with the golden dome still blazing, the pharmacist and its small platoon of techs wouldn't be able to get out until the slammer of shielding ran out of juice. My hope was that the rampaging fire would burn them all to death without me ever having to lift another finger. No muss, no fuss. I felt confident that at least a few of the techs would die, but held very little hope that the blaze would kill the pharmacist. I had a strong hunch that it would take more than a few well-placed fire bombs to end the thing. "Get into position," I barked at Croc. The mimic dog nodded, then quickly disappeared down one of the adjacent hallways, preparing to launch an ambush of its own. Meanwhile, I picked up a crudely cut sheet of plexiglass and attached it to my left forearm with some rope, which I'd looped through several small holes drilled through the front of the makeshift shield. Thinking about police riot gear had given me the idea. Even if I couldn't find any armor yet, there was no reason I couldn't make some. I'd scavenged the plexiglass from the photo booth, and though cutting it had been a pain in the ass, between my Stanley utility knife and my newfound strength, I'd managed to get her done. I positioned myself in aisle 25, cough, cold, and allergy, just out of sight of the entryway into the pharmacy proper. Whatever crawled out of there wouldn't be able to see me, but I'd be able to see them just fine. Shield on my left arm, hammer in my right hand, I waited in tense anticipation as the timer finally hit 0 and the golden glow from the shield guttered and vanished. A billow of smoke wafted out from the door, followed only a second later by a high-pitched wail as several hunched, rat-faced techs streamed out en masse. Severe burns had turned huge patches of skin blister red, and most of their lab coats were little more than smoldering ruins. Considering these same assholes had set Croc on fire, I didn't have a sliver of mercy to lend them. I thrust my hammer forward and triggered slippery when wet, conjuring a thin sheen of water across the floor directly outside of the door. Scrambling rot claws hit the water and 4 techs went tumbling and sliding across the slick linoleum. One, totally out of control, careened onto a tiled square that looked subtly different from the others surrounding it. In my eyes it glowed with a faint red light, indicating that it was a runic pressure plate. Spelunker's sixth sense didn't just allow me to identify traps. It also granted me the bone-deep knowledge of how to arm, disarm, and even move those traps. Most of the deadly surprises scattered through the mediocre mart required specialized tools to manipulate or alter, tools I didn't have, sadly, but not the one I'd relocated from the greeting card section in aisle 4. That was a simple pressure plate construct, which could be picked up and moved without much trouble, although it still required a deft touch. The already charbroiled tech skittered across the top of the plate and triggered the arming mechanism. A whirling saw blade of pure mana erupted from the floor, splitting the creature in two and killing it instantly. The trap was a one-off, and I'd been hoping to use it against the pharmacist, but this was still better than nothing. Spelunker's sixth sense was an incredible skill, but getting a relic that would allow me to construct my own traps was at the top of my wish list. I couldn't wait for a chance to start building some of these things for myself. As for the rest of the half-dead techs, I triggered my new and improved Bleach Blaze. Instead of a blob of pure blue goop, this one had streaks of red swirling through the mass as well as a miasma of orange heat hanging around the outer edges. I quick cast 3 bolts, splattering each of the visible techs with corrosive death magic. My good old-fashioned, redneck-engineered Molotov cocktail had nearly killed the techs long before they'd ever made it out of the pharmacy, and Bleach Blaze finished the job without a problem. Experience flooded in, 175 points for each kill. Combined with what I'd gained from killing the photophage and the early batch of lab techs, it was enough to push me up to level 10, though, fat lot of good that would do me right now. Leveling up didn't even restore my health or mana. And speaking of my mana, between the slippery when wet spell and the series of rapid-fire Bleach Blazes, my blue mana gauge had damn near bottomed out. I fished out the can of Jolt Cola, cracked the top with a satisfying hiss, and pounded the beverage, which was so sweet it made my teeth ache. But it was worth it. As the cola trickled down my throat, renewed energy surged through me like a bolt of caffeinated lightning. I crushed the empty can and tossed it on the ground before retreating even further into the aisle. After a few seconds of waiting, another 3 techs, all badly burned and mangled from the fire, rushed out of the pharmacy, followed by the lanky pharmacist. The plague doctor had taken some significant burn damage as well, but its health still lingered just above half, and it looked as though it was slowly ticking upward. This emo chucklefuck had passive health regeneration, and from the look of things, its health regen was a hell of a lot better than what either Croc or I had. That meant I couldn't afford to take the pressure off, or we'd be right back to square one. The pharmacist swiveled its head between its minions and barked out guttural commands in a language I didn't recognize. The words sounded like the way doctors wrote, all jumbled and wrong. The 3 remaining techs chittered their acknowledgement, then spread out and began to sweep the aisles. I wasn't worried about them. Croc and I had anticipated that they'd likely split up to search for us, and Croc was ready to take them out. That left the towering plague doctor to me. Drawing in a deep breath, I raised my shield and rushed out into the open, boots slapping against the floor. The dweller moved with snake-like speed. It leveled its silver pistol and blasted out several rounds. I flinched, muttering a prayer to the good Lord Almighty that my shield would hold. If those things were real bullets, they would have shredded the plexiglass and riddled my body with bloody bullet holes. But they weren't. The syringes clanged against the makeshift shield and sent a network of sputtery cracks racing across the surface. But that was all. The shield held. The pharmacist let out a surprisingly bird-like trill of apparent frustration, then pulled a glass orb filled with sloshing red liquid from the bandolier slung across its chest. A jolt of panic raced through me, and I knew I needed to put a stop to that quick, fast, and in a hurry. With clear line of sight, I raised my hammer and unleashed Bleach Blaze. The blob of blue and orange hit the creature square in the chest, and the shock of the impact caused the pharmacist to fumble the potion in its gloved hand. The glass orb landed with a crash and red gas billowed out in a cloud, swirling around the plague doctor and obscuring it from view. A sense of smug satisfaction washed over me. Suck on that, dickwipe. My satisfaction was short-lived. A pulse of cleansing white light rippled outward from the pharmacist until it looked like the dweller was standing in an angelic halo. As the light touched the tongues of red smoke, they dissipated and vanished. So did the blue splatter of corrosive bleach decorating the pharmacist's black cassock. As far as I could see, Bleach Blaze hadn't done any damage at all, and it looked like the pharmacist had some sort of ability to neutralize enemy spells, which was bad news for me, since Bleach Blaze was the only offensive spell I had in my arsenal. I highly doubted that Bad Trip would have any effect at all against something this high-level and intelligent. The Plague Doctor was a doctor after all, and the rest of my skills required me to be in punch-you-in-the-teeth range. Improvise, adapt, and overcome, I thought grimly. I glanced back over one shoulder and spotted another section of floor I'd marked with a dab of spray paint. Another trap, called an internal combustion engine. Anyone who stepped on it would turn into a living bomb that would explode from the inside out, leveling anything inside a 30-foot radius. If I could goad the pharmacist to trigger the mechanism, then maybe I could kill it just like I'd killed the mall rat king, get the backrooms to do the bulk of the dirty work for me. Without thinking, I dropped my hammer into its loop, then grabbed a bottle of bright pink Gastro Shield from the shelf to my right and pitched it at the encroaching pharmacist. Thick bubblegum-colored sludge splattered across the creature's cassock. It did about as much damage as throwing a sponge at a mountain, but that wasn't the point. It was insulting. Annoying. I started backpedaling deeper into the aisle, grabbing other things off the digestive care shelf, which I then proceeded to chuck at the dweller. I could see the anger building to a crescendo. The creature raised its pistol again and fired more rounds, but they bounced off my plexiglass riot shield. It wouldn't hold up against too many more of those, but the pharmacist didn't know that. "Sorry, jackass," I taunted. "You're gonna have to do better than that. You want to kill me, I'm thinking you're gonna have to get your hands dirty. You can start by cleaning up all this shit." I reached my arm out and swiped boxes of antacids and bottles of liquid laxatives onto the floor. Pills, powders, and goop of every kind splattered as lids popped off and bottles broke. Whoops, my bad. You want me to get a mop bucket? I won't help you clean that up, but I'll watch you do the work. That was the last straw. I'd briefly worked retail after getting out of the Corps. I'd quit after 6 weeks. Spending time in an active war zone was significantly less demeaning. The plague doctor pulled out a single-edged sword that resembled an oversized scalpel and darted toward me with a squawk of rage. I was only a few feet away from the internal combustion engine trap. The pharmacist was barreling straight toward it, and I didn't want to be within spitting range when that thing went off. I needed to make my getaway, and I needed to do it now. I grabbed a bottle of Metamucil fiber powder off the shelf beside me and spiked it straight down onto the floor, just a few feet from the nearly invisible runic symbol. Pale orange powder erupted outward, coating the floor and enveloping me in a dust cloud. Using the momentary distraction, I triggered Mall Ninja's strike, slipped effortlessly into a pool of nearby shadow, and darted outside the effective kill range of the trap. The pharmacist blundered into the powdery but fibrous cloud, wildly swiping at the air with its gleaming razor blade. Its steps faltered as the dust settled and I was nowhere to be seen. It twirled around, lab coat fluttering out as its black boots missed the trap by a matter of inches. The dweller was so close. But not close enough. I was still cloaked in shadow, but I didn't have many cards left to play. If I was going to kill this Kisedic and claim the mediocre mart for myself, I needed to do something. I could always launch a bleach blaze and hope the pharmacist would stumble back into the trap. Problem was, the spell had done next to nothing before, and once I broke the concealment of the Mall Ninja's veil, I wouldn't get another chance. It would be far more effective if I could get close and physically shove the dweller into the trap. The pharmacist was tall and gangly, and it looked like a strong breeze would bowl it over. Getting up close was the best option, but then I would be well within the blast radius of the trap. Unless a devilish idea suddenly occurred to me. Moving quickly, I opened up my storage space and hauled out a wicked-looking machete. It was the artifact that would teleport me to a completely random location within line of sight as soon as I landed a blow against an enemy. I'd thought the item was as useless as tits on a bull, but I was big enough to admit when I'd been wrong. It was mostly useless. Except in very specific circumstances. Like, say, forcing an enemy to stagger into a magical landmine, then teleporting away before the act of heroism turned into a kamikaze mission. Holding my breath, I crept closer as the cloud of fiber began to settle. The pharmacist continued to turn in slow circles, searching fruitlessly for me. I pulled another screw from the pouch at my belt and tossed it in an overhand arcade. The screw landed behind the plague doctor with the soft clink of metal. The noise was just loud enough to momentarily draw the pharmacist's attention. It turned its back on me, searching for the source of the noise. In the same instant, I leapt from the shadows and slammed the machete blade into the plague doctor as the weight of my body pushed the dweller directly into the runic trap. Time stretched and everything seemed to happen in slow motion as our bodies collided and the machete blade sank deep, slicing through a chunk of the red bar floating above the Harmos's head. Then, there was a flash of light followed in quick succession by the roar of a Harrier jet engine and a terrible burst of heat that singed the eyebrows from my face and left my skin feeling tight and tender. For a long beat, I thought I was dead, floating blissfully on a sea of white, totally at peace and without a single care in the entire world. Then pain flooded back in as if a dam had broken and I found myself sprawled on the floor, staring up at the white tiles of the ceiling overhead. I was approximately 15 feet away from the obliterated corpse of the very dead Harmosist. Apparently, I hadn't teleported quite far enough away to escape the blast completely unscathed. My health had dropped to a thumbnail of red, and everything in my body hurt. I smiled anyway, even though that hurt too. I was alive and I'd just cleared my first job board mission. Several new research achievements hung in the air above me, just waiting for me to give them a little attention. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the blue rubber face that popped into view. There was deep concern in Croc's goggly eyes. "Odrit," the dog muttered. It sighed. "I really liked this one." I laughed, blood frothing on my lips as I did. "I ain't dead yet," I groaned. "Now how's about you be a pal and see if you can't find me a healing elixir back in the pharmacy?" Chapter 25 Croc found a small treasure trove of lesser and greater Zima healing elixirs stashed away inside one of the fridges in the pharmacy. We were just lucky they hadn't been destroyed in the raging inferno of burning vodka like so many of the other drugs and pharmaceuticals. I knew the store itself would naturally heal over time, but I was less sure that the supplies would regenerate, especially once I cut this section off from the rest of the backrooms and turned it into my own interdimensional safe haven. I regretted the need to burn everything down, but we hadn't really had many other options. Croc and I had barely escaped by the skin of our teeth. If we'd done anything differently, chances were good that I'd be dead right now, just another hopeless casualty like so many of the delvers that had gone before me. Besides, even with the destruction, there were still lots of prizes to be had. The healing elixirs were a huge win, but there was also a cooler filled with mana elixirs and another stocked with stamina regen potions, which were called Electric Quench, fuck your thirst. The potion was bright green and looked like Gatorade. Most of the other drugs were gone, but the lab equipment itself was in decent shape, which gave me a small sliver of hope that I might be able to start creating my own elixirs at some point. Two of the lab tech bodies were so badly burned and mangled that we weren't able to recover anything off their charred remains, but we did manage to pick up another Furlenmeyer load of cocktail relics, plus 5 common shards and 2 more uncommon shards. That brought me up to 32 common shards and 13 uncommon shards, enough to start forging the pieces into usable relics. The shards and extra relics would serve as stock for my store or as fuel to level up my own abilities, but I still wasn't sure which. It really depended on what my future customers wanted. For now, I chucked everything unceremoniously into storage and systematically worked through the debris and wreckage, looking for anything else worth salvaging. The internal combustion engine trap had damn near obliterated the Harmosist and had taken a good chunk of aisle 9 along with it. The plague doctor lay in smoking pieces, scattered across the floor, while bits of inky skin and strings of intestine hung from nearby shelving units. Croc and I would have to clean that mess up before our grand opening. I was gutted to find that the Harmosist's silver syringe pistol had been transformed into an unusable twisted hunk of scrap metal and that the plague doctor's oversized scalpel sword had suffered a similar fate. The sword I could live without, but I'd been salivating over the prospect of running around like John Wayne, quick drawing the silver syringe pistol and blasting the shit out of anything that looked sideways at me. Some things were just not meant to be, it seemed. It wasn't all bad news, though. The Harmosist's body may have been mangled beyond belief, but there was enough of its torso left for me to recover 2 relics. The first looked like a set of small bronze scales, which might be used to measure the components of an elixir. It was a common relic appropriately named the Pharmacist's Scales, which allowed me to exchange mana for health or health for mana in equal measure. Although it didn't have any direct combat application, it had to be one of the most useful utility skills in my arsenal, just beneath the compass of the Catacomber and Bleach Blaze. I'd suffered some pretty horrendous injuries since clipping into the backrooms, and in my estimation, praying to stumble across a lukewarm bottle of Zima was a terrible long-term survival strategy. As we used to say in the Marine Corps, hope is a shitty plan. Healing myself completely would burn through the majority of my mana, but at least it was a reasonably reliable way of not dying. I struggled to think of a situation where I might want to use my life force to supplement my mana, especially considering how slowly health regenerated by comparison. But I'd also thought the randomly teleporting machete had been stupid too, and that had just saved my ass. I added the scales to my spatial core, which brought me up to 9 relics in total. The 10th and final slot in my spatial core was shortly filled by the Pharmacist's second relic, which turned out to be a rare ability called Sterilization Field. The item itself had to be the strangest one I'd received so far. It was a white cube about the size of a toaster oven with a clear glass circle set into a small locking door. Inside the machine were a series of bulbs that emitted a blindingly bright blue light. There were several buttons on the outside, along with a label that declared the box to be a medical-grade UV chamber. Variant Research Division, Sterilization Field. Rare Relic, Level 1. Range, Self. Cost, 50 mana. Duration, 20 seconds. Every alchemist knows that working with volatile chemicals and arcane elixirs is dangerous enough without errant strands of magic floating around. Unleash the power of variant UVC bulbs and conjure a bubble of ethereal blue-white light, designed to keep bad magic out and your organs in. This shimmering field not only travels with you, but also reduces all incoming magic and elemental attack damage by 50%. Even better, any enemy spellcaster trapped within the sterilization field who has a lower resonance score than you will be unable to activate mana-based relics until leaving the bubble's area of effect. This relic enables mana usage. It's more than protection, it's domination. I'd seen the Pharmacist use this skill firsthand to dampen the effects of the red gas cloud in my Bleach Blaze spell. At 50 mana, Sterilization Field cost a metaphysical arm and a leg to use and would wipe out every ounce of mana I had at my disposal, but the possible applications were staggering and endless. Sure, it wouldn't protect me at all from taking physical damage, but even without forging the relic further, this was a cornerstone technique that I could structure the rest of my build around. It would be useless against dwellers like the Roy Gremlins or Mimics who mostly relied on physical strength and beating the shit out of their opponents, but it could defang anything that used magic. Things like the Photophage or the Crow-faced Lab Techs. Or maybe even the Flayed Monarch. Though, admittedly, I'd seen the skinless horror show wield that curved Kompish like it had been born with a blade in its hands. The ruler of the 999th floor could probably gut me like a trout without ever using an ounce of magic. Still, this felt like a small step in the right direction. Killing the Pharmacist earned me 750 experience points, not to mention the added 1,250 experience for clearing the Job board mission, and all the loot tokens that came with it as a bonus, 5 copper Delver loot tokens, 2 silver Delver loot tokens, and 1 gold mercenary loot token. The massive influx of experience rocketed me all the way up to level 12. Next time I visited a progenitor monolith, I'd have 15 more personal enhancement points to distribute, though most of those were going straight into resonance. I also had a string of new unlocked achievements waiting for me, which I casually read over while ripping through a bag of beef jerky and chugging a can of Peak Dew, different elevation, same dewy goodness. The beef jerky was dry and, like the Jolt Cola, the Peak Dew soda hurt my teeth. Not that I cared. After eating nothing but candy bars and froyo, this was a feast delivered from on high, like God raining down manna from the heavens. Except this manna from the heavens left me with burps potent enough to strip paint. Research achievement unlocked. Merc for hire. How does it feel to recklessly put your life on the line while mercilessly slaughtering others for cold hard cash? Or was it experience points? Fame? Doesn't matter. The principles are the same. You've officially sold your soul and proven you have the careless disregard for your own life necessary to take on some of the dodgiest gigs the researcher can dream up. Now get your ass back out there, the grind awaits. Reward: you already got paid for this and we both know it. Don't try to double dip, dickwad. Research achievement unlocked. Combination mechanic. Most people say that randomly smashing a bunch of relics together is a fool's game. At best you'll probably ruin a perfectly good skill, at worst you'll murder yourself and everyone else inside a 50-foot radius. But that hasn't deterred you, which might not be the high praise you think it is. Still, you've created not one, not two, but 3 unique relics, forging shitty bullshit into slightly less shitty bullshit. My hat's off to you. Reward: 1x Silver Forger Loot Token. Research achievement unlocked. Bargain Basement Hero. Holy cheaply made armor, discount 10. You're like Batman. If Batman was a hobo. Living under a bridge. With terrible credit and a crippling mental condition. What the fuck is wrong with you? You just cleared a 2-star bounty clad in gear so low level, you couldn't give it away at a yard sale. For all the protection your current equipment offers, you might as well have ventured in bare-assed. But hey, who needs fancy OSHA-approved dungeon delving equipment when you've got guts, guile, and a pair of cajones the size of bowling balls? Reward: 1x Gold Armorer Loot Token. Get yourself something nice. Hopefully something that resembles dignity. Research achievement unlocked. Overkill Overlord. Blame. Bam. Kaboom. That's the sound of you using a tactical nuke to swat a goddamned fly. Do you feel good about yourself now? By defeating an enemy with an attack that dealt 10 times more damage than necessary to kill it, you've officially landed yourself the Overkill Overlord research achievement, proving that excessive is just another word for extra fun. Reward: 5x Copper Delver Loot Token, 1x Gold Slayer Loot Token. Title: Overkill Overlord. Gain a 2x experience bonus when dealing more than 10 times the amount of damage necessary to kill any opponent. I wasn't eager to go back to the loot arcade anytime soon. The mobile murder muncher was still the worst of the horrors I'd seen so far, but I was starting to rack up a significant hoard of tokens once again, including several silvers and golds. The prizes I would no doubt gain would be worth the danger, but that could wait for a little longer. First, I wanted to set up a cordon and get my personal blanket fort up and running. I killed the rest of the beef jerky, chased it down with the remainder of the 2 Sweet Peak du Cola, and pushed off the counter with a groan. What's the plan now? Croc asked, easing his way out of a nearby aisle with strings of gristle and bloody meat dangling from his blue, rubbery snout. You've got a little something right here, I said, gesturing vaguely at my entire face. Croc's jaws stretched and a huge tongue emerged, pulling the excess strips of meat into his mouth. Is that better? Yep, you got it all, I said, feeling queasy. Intellectually knowing Croc was a carnivorous monster was somehow very different than watching him slurp down chunks of raw monster meat, but I kept my mouth shut. The mimic was terrifying and vaguely disgusting, but it had also proven itself to be an ally 100 times over. So long as Croc was eating my enemies and not me, I didn't really care. Did you find the medicine you needed? The dog asked. I dropped my gaze and couldn't look at the mimic in the face. Yeah, about that. I said slowly, rubbing at the back of my neck. I've been putting this off for a while, but I'm not sure it can wait any longer. Oh God, Croc blurted, you're dying. Wait, no, it is hemorrhoids. Or you have cancer. But it's contagious cancer and now I have it too. I barked a laugh that I didn't really feel. No, it's none of those things. It's... I trailed off, not sure how to explain. Maybe it's better if I just show you. I fell silent and let things go hazy as I pulled up my mini-map until it filled most of my field of vision. I could see all the details of the mediocre mart, from the registers by the front door, all the way to the still smoldering pharmacy in the back. Marked on the map were the corpses of the dead dwellers, their bodies rotting away, and the whole area glowed a faint shade of blue, which indicated it had been cleared of both enemies and blight. Although this was my first time using the blanket fort ability, the knowledge for how to use it was already nestled deep in the base of my brain, like a memory half forgotten. I raised a finger and began to trace it across the map, outlining the edges of the newly liberated Mediocre Mart. In the peripheries of my vision, a blue light bled from the air, following the course of my finger like an ethereal serpent. As I traced, a numeric counter appeared in a corner of the map, tracking how much square footage I had to play with. The skill granted me 2,500 square feet per character level, which was more than enough to cover the entirety of the store. Which was great news, since there were several other locations I wanted to add in order to really maximize the skill. I finished tracing the perimeter of the store, connecting the edges of ghostly blue light together, then took a few seconds to mark the sliding glass doors as the designated entryway anchor point. As I did, a new prompt appeared. Corvo's Blanket Fort. You've selected 14,200 square feet of eligible pro-generated material resource space. Would you like to use Corvo's Blanket Fort to convert the selected material into a personal superspace dwelling? Proceed yes/no. Researcher's Codex note, doing so will amputate the selected material from its current spatial location and transfer it to an extra-dimensional superspace pocket, accessible only through a designated doorway anchor. Additional sequestered pro-generated material can be grafted onto the current space at any time. For a full list of Blanket Fort features and options, please see the Blanket Fort Operations Manual, available after claiming your first section of the backrooms. I mentally selected yes, and both the prompt and map vanished. The whole room violently shook and rumbled like a raging bull, knocking Croc from its feet and many of the items from the shelves. But the tremors only lasted a few seconds, and once they passed another short notice swam into view in all its 8-bit glory. Congratulations, you've officially created your very own personal superspace dwelling, or PSD, not to be confused with PTSD, which are two very different things, as we learned the hard way. To complete the process, and fully cordon off the selected location, you must first plant a prime doorway anchor point in an exterior backrooms location. 7x items have been added to your subspace storage space, 5x standard doorway anchor, 1x VIP doorway anchor, 1x Blanket Fort Operations Manual. Would you like to assign a name to your new personal superspace dwelling? If not, the name on record will remain with its current designation, Mediocre Mart. Yes/no? Unlike the last message, this one gave me a moment of pause. A name. Of course, I'd need to name the place, but I haven't given it any thought until right now. I'd had a few bigger, more pressing things on my mind. Like mimics. And mutated Pac-Man. And Molotov cocktail hurling Birdman. Now that I had a chance to breathe, however, I realized I couldn't leave the name as it was. Although Mediocre Mart was a painfully accurate description of this place, it didn't exactly inspire confidence. If I was going to get delvers from countless floors to shop at my little interdimensional general store and funnel me all their excess relics and artifacts, I was going to need something catchy. Something memorable. Something I could use to advertise. A line from one of the achievements I'd just unlocked bubbled up to the surface of my mind. Discount Dan. It was dumb, but it also had a certain ring to it. But it needed something else. Something more. Something to give prospective customers a better idea of what kind of wares I'd be offering. As a kid I'd always loved going to the flea market with my dad. We had a big old flea market not far from us called Big Time Bargains, and about once a month my dad and I would head out that way to look for deals, and flea markets were, hands down, the best place in the world to find deals. That and pawn shops. As a perpetual handyman, my dad was always on the hunt for used but well-loved power tools. Going to the flea market was work for him, but it was pure joy for me. Rummaging through other people's junk, searching for all the little gems they might have overlooked. And there were always treasures to be found, because as the saying goes, one man's trash is another man's treasure. Every month I'd walk away with something. Old coins from places I'd never heard of. Pokémon cards and comic books. Old school video game cartridges for consoles that were no longer in production. Who would want those? Me and my dad, that's who. We had an Atari and a NES, the Super Nintendo and the Dreamcast, the first generation Xbox and the PS1 and 2. All picked up for dirt cheap from big-time bargains. We didn't have a lot of money growing up and my dad was a frugal man, so we never had the newest things, but he had an eye for a deal like no one I ever knew. I wanted to make a place that he would want to shop in. A place where one man's trash could be treasure to the right buyer. Discount Dan's backroom bargains, I said, the words little more than a whisper under my breath. There was a brilliant flare of light and the prompt disappeared, replaced by the map once more. The name above the section of real estate I'd just carved out for myself now read Discount Dan's Backroom Bargains in blocky black script. Research achievement unlocked. Safe Space Warrior. The real world generally doesn't care about your personal comfort, and it sure as shit doesn't come with safe spaces, no matter what your high school teacher told you. Unless your name is Dan. Apparently, you are such a special snowflake that the world literally revolves around you. At least a little. Still, I wouldn't let this go to your head. Good money says you're dead within a week. Remind. 1 week. Reward, 5x Copper Delver Loot Token, 1x Gold Entrepreneur Loot Token. I dismissed the achievement notice with a wave of my hand and turned away from the counter. Croc was looking up at me with a reproachful gaze. Dan, I think maybe we have a few things we need to talk about. Chapter 26. It seemed like it would be difficult to pull off a reproachful look as a rubber dog with googly eyes, but somehow Croc managed it anyway. You're not sick, the dog said, not a question but a cold, hard statement of fact. And that was no run-of-the-mill spell you just cast, Dan. That was a sequester ritual. There was no accusation in its tone, but I could see it carved into the lines of the mimic's face. I've never seen a sequester ritual in action before, and that's because all of them are mythic quality and no one other than the monarchs and lords of the lower floors have them. You look like a simple noob, Croc continued, but things aren't adding up. Your navigation abilities. The way you can spot mimics even faster than I can. Your ability to detect and disarm traps that even the most experienced trapmiths would readily avoid. It's all coming together. Croc nodded his head sadly. You've been lying to me, Dan. If that's even your real name. But maybe it's not. Maybe you're a Josh or a Steve. Could even be an Adam. Of course my name's Dan, I replied. I swear, it's not like that, Croc. Then what is it like, huh? The mimic shot back before I could finish. Because to me, this feels like you've been lying to me from the get-go, even though I've been nothing but honest and helpful. Have you ever even gone to a water park? Because I just don't know what to believe anymore. My name is Dan, I reassured the dog, and yes, I have been to a water park. And I've been honest with you. Mostly. There are just a few minor details I may have left out. Lying by omission is still lying, Dan, Croc said stiffly, its tail standing straight up at attention. And this wasn't just lying by omission, this was just lying by lying. You said we were friends. Friends might not eat each other, but I'm pretty sure they don't lie to each other either. It looked down and seemed to wilt like an old flower, too long without water. But what do I know? I'm not a human like you. I'm just a dumb, soulless monster, not worthy of trust. That's what Rashid told me. The dog peeked up at me with one eye. What happened to Rashid? I asked, more out of morbid curiosity than anything else. Vivisected by the arch-surgeon of the Bloody Blades, Croc said morosely. Quite an ugly death, that one was. Maybe if Rashid had trusted me a little more, he would have listened when I told him to stay away from the crypty crabs that live in the wishing pond. I was silent for a long beat, not wanting to look at the dog that wasn't really a dog at all. I sighed, dropped down onto one knee, and placed a hand onto Croc's rubbery shoulder. We are friends, Croc, I finally said, breaking the tension. I wouldn't be alive right now if it wasn't for you, then why didn't you tell me earlier? Croc cut in, looking up at me. I didn't ask questions about how you managed to get a navigation relic. But this? keeping a sequester ritual from me. It raised a paw and swept it out. You just created your own personal pocket world. That's something else entirely. That's dangerous, and you should have told me sooner. That's precisely why I didn't tell you. Because it is dangerous and complicated and I was afraid you'd abandon me if you knew the truth, I blurted out before I could overthink things. Like I said, we are friends, but in my experience, friendship has its limits. If I asked you to help me move a couch, that's one thing. But asking you to help me wage a war against one of the most powerful creatures in the backrooms, that's a big ask, especially for someone you met less than a day ago. I'm not a human and maybe things are different where you're from, Croc said, but here, friend is an unconditional term. This is a hungry world, Dan. A place where everything is trying to kill you if it means surviving for another day. There are alliances. There are factions. Tenuous partnerships. Even kingdoms with hundreds or sometimes thousands of denizens. But that's all about survival. Every relationship in the backrooms is transactional. What can you do for me? How can you help me survive? But to me, friendship is about companionship, the dog continued. It's about service and loyalty. About being there even when things get hard. That's why I choose to pick the form of a real, human dog. Croc paused again, staring deep into my face with its stupid googly eyes. It was like the mimic was peering right into the deepest part of my soul. I'm not going to leave you, Dan. But if you want me to help, I need to know what kind of trouble you're in. The dog cocked its head to one side. No, scratch that. I need to know what kind of trouble we're in. I took a deep breath and braced myself, preparing for Croc to either run away as fast as its rubber legs would go or attack me on the spot. It was all well and good to extol the virtues of friendship, loyalty, and selfless service until you learned that you were suddenly hanging out with someone at the top of the skinless court's most wanted list. Although I'd gotten comparatively lucky so far, having an enemy like the flayed monarch was almost a guaranteed death sentence, and anyone who helped me would likely suffer fallout as well. It all started with a bachelor party, I said, unspilling the story word by word, beginning with the night before, then telling the mimic about waking up in the middle of a raging battle between two beings of otherworldly power. Croc asked a few questions while I spoke. The mimic seemed extremely interested in the trench-coat-wearing gunslinger who'd saved my ass with a slammer of shielding, though I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. When I finally got to the part about the gunslinger stabbing the hellish monarch through the chest and knocking loose the brass compass that now resided in my spatial core, I expected the dog to freak out. Instead, Croc threw back its head and roared with laughter. The mimic had a deep, full laugh that resonated in my bones. The sound was so happy and infectious, I found myself grinning from ear to ear, even though I wasn't quite sure what exactly was so funny. So wait. The dog gasped in between chuckles. You stole a mythic emblem from the flayed monarch? It paused. Just picked it right up off the floor and stuck it in your court. I nodded, sober as a judge. Croc laughed even harder, falling onto one side, then rolling and thrashing across the linoleum. That went on for so long I began to have legitimate concerns that the mimic was having an epileptic fit. Finally, after what felt like an obscenely long time, the dog's laughter tapered off. Croc righted itself and swiped a tear from its eye with one paw. Why or how googly I had tear ducts was beyond me. This is the best thing I've ever heard, the dog said. I've had dreams that weren't half as satisfying as this. The flayed monarch lost one of the most potent emblems ever to exist to a brand new delver. The irony is, in a word, delicious. I'm so confused, I said. To me this all sounds like bad news. I'm level 12 and I basically robbed a supernatural warlord with unspeakable godlike powers of a priceless treasure. The flayed monarch marked me for death and anyone who serves the skinless court is obligated to murder me on sight. Could be I'm missing something, but I'm having a hard time seeing any upside here. I'm going to be honest, Dan, there aren't a lot of upsides. This is either the best or worst thing to ever happen to anyone, and I'm not sure which it is. The flayed monarch is. Croc paused, tapping one paw thoughtfully against its chin. "Well, powerful beyond the scope of human imagination, certainly. He is arguably the oldest of all the great monarchs and rules the 999th floor in its entirety. But the flayed monarch is also not well loved by most of the other denizens. Even better, you personally met and assisted the boundless wanderer." Croc's eyes seemed to shimmer with a new reverence as they looked at me. "First time I'm hearing that name," I replied slowly. "Should it mean something to me?" "Not at all," Croc said, shaking its head. "You're as fresh and green as spring grass, but the man you helped, the one who gave you the slammer of shielding, he's a folk hero on pretty much every floor. Except, of course, on the 999th floor, where even whispering his name can earn you a death sentence. See, there are a handful of monarchs that occupy the lower floors, and they're all perpetually at war with each other. Most of the folks above floor 100 try to keep their heads down and stay out of the politicking and machinations of the great monarchs below, though sometimes their conflicts spill over even here." "What's this have to do with this boundless wanderer guy?" I asked, feeling even more confused than I was before. "Is he one of these monarchs?" "Yes," Croc said, before shaking his head, "but actually no. He has the power of a monarch, but no kingdom. He's a wanderer, like the name implies. But he's also more than that. The Boundless Wanderer is a traveling monster hunter who prowls the floors, helping people while eternally searching for a way back to your world. He is venerated by most of the humans who call the backrooms home, and his conflict with the flayed monarch is legendary and spans centuries. The skinless nightmare killed the Wanderer's daughter nearly a century ago, and things have been a bit dodgy ever since. So helping him was a good thing?" I hedged, feeling a little better. "That depends, doesn't it?" Croc said. "Mostly on who finds you first. I doubt the flayed monarch was able to kill the Wanderer, but he's still only one man. The flayed monarch has the sworn loyalty of most of the dweller factions that exist within the backrooms, not to mention several human warbrands, including a few that operate in this area. Hudson's Red Hands work the 3rd through 5th floors, and if any of them find you first, a quick death is the most you can hope for and far more than you should expect." "And what about you?" I asked. "You said most of the dweller factions are loyal to the flayed monarch. Does that include the mimics?" The question hung between us like an ominous storm cloud. Now that Croc knew the truth, where would the mimics stand? "Yes," Croc finally said. "Most of the sentient mimics are aspirants of the Skinless Court. But not me," it continued reassuringly. "Do you know much about the mimic procreation cycle, Dan?" "Why in the name of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph would I know anything about the mimic procreation cycle?" "Well, I know all about human procreation," Croc replied. "What with the storks and the gnomes and the baskets that you leave under the chimney, I am truly fascinated to hear how you think human procreation works," I muttered. "So I just figured you might have some of the basic facts about mimics," Croc continued, unabated, "seeing how we are the most common species in the backrooms, and because we are best friends and all. We mimics are born in clutches. Mature mimics can lay upward of 100 eggs at a time, but our parents aren't exactly the nurturing sort. They lay the eggs and then leave the younglings to fend for themselves. Survival of the fittest, and all that. Thing is, I was born premature and defective. I was smaller and weaker than all of my kin and had an internal deformity, which prevents me from perfectly mimicking anything, really. I can take many forms, but, and this might come as a shock to you, all of them are subtly wrong." Croc stole a sidelong glance at me, as though admitting some dark and terrible secret. "The truth is, I couldn't make myself look like a dog, even if you showed me a picture of one. I'm broken on the inside, Dan. My siblings saw that and cast me out, fully expecting me to die within days or weeks. But even though my magic is broken, I was always smarter than the others. I could think and talk, which are normally abilities that don't develop until a mimic reaches maturity, around level 20. That didn't help me hunt, though. The truth of it is, I was helpless and would have died within weeks if not for the kindness of a human who found me. Her name was Gertrude. Gertrude Evans. She was a 72-year-old grandmother who clipped into the back rooms from a laundromat in Madison, Wisconsin. Her husband had died 3 years before and she lived at home alone with her 7 cats. But the cats didn't come. It was just her, and she was alone and scared. But she was also a survivor. Gertrude served during the Second World War. She said she was a WASP, you know, which is a type of pilot, and not a bug as I originally assumed. Anyway, the important thing is that Gertrude was fierce. But she was also kind and sweet and generous. She found me curled up in one of the service corridors. I was level 1 and so weak from hunger I could hardly move. She was lonely and missed her cats. I was dying and roughly cat-sized. It was a match made in heaven, though, admittedly, her poor eyesight might have also had something to do with it. When she started calling me Kitty, I assumed the rough shape of a cat. Thanks to my defective genes, it was a truly terrible mimicry. It was only good enough to fool someone half-blind and mostly senile. Fortunately for me, Gertrude was both. She adopted me. Fed me. Croc smiled, and shed tears in its eyes. She would carry me around inside this enormous tote bag and would pat my head as we walked. At first, I considered eating her, but before long I realized I would live longer helping her than I would consuming her delicious flesh. She was my first friend. Really my only friend until you, Dan. What happened? I asked. Of all the Delvers Croc had told me about so far, this was the one I wanted to hear about the least. She lasted 4 months, Croc said evenly. Survived longer than any of the other Delvers I've ever been with. She made it down to the 12th floor, which is when she ran across an aspirant of the court. The mimic faltered, as though trying to find the right words. She didn't make it, the dog finished simply, though what he didn't say spoke volumes. Croc never shied away from all the gruesome ways other Delvers had perished but was silent about Gertrude. As for me, I was branded as an outcast for helping her. Croc's form blurred until it was a writhing mass of tentacles and teeth. The mimic slowly turned, and I saw a mark burned into its rubbery skin. The brand looked like an angry red welt in the shape of an eye with a jagged crown floating above it. I'd reached level 3 by that point, and though I was still weak and small and defective, I was strong enough to fend for myself. There wasn't enough left of Gertrude to bury, so I figured the best way to pay her kindness forward was to try to help other new Delvers. Because that's what she'd done for me, and I figured that's what she would have wanted me to do for others. Croc once more resumed the form of a dog, then dropped its snout and curled in on itself. Despite my endless list of failures, I've done my best to do right by her. I scooted over so I could sit beside the dog that wasn't a dog, then slung an arm around its shoulders. She sounds like something special. She was, Croc agreed, leaning its weight against me. She was the closest thing I've ever had to a mother, and the flayed monarch took her from me. There was an uncharacteristically deep rumble of anger in Croc's chest as it spoke. We'll probably both die in rather excruciating ways, but if there's even a sliver of a chance that we can hurt the monarch in the process, then it'll be worth it. Whoa, let's rein in all this gruesome death talk, I replied quickly. I have no intention of dying as a martyr or some sort of hero. I want to live a long, full life that involves lots of casual day drinking. And, maybe someday, I'd like to find a way out of this twisted funhouse of tomfoolery. I know the odds aren't in our favor, but I also don't think this is a lost cause. Not completely. It's gonna take a truckload of elbow grease and more than a little luck, but I've got a plan to keep us both alive, and maybe we can continue to honor Gertrude's memory while we do it. I described the emblem's manifold abilities and how I plan to use those abilities to make a lot of friends and get my hands on enough rare artifacts and relics to give us both a fighting chance against the flayed monarch and his army of bootlickers. By the time I was finished, Croc was practically spinning in circles out of sheer excitement. Where do we start? The mimic said as I finally picked myself up off the ground. I surveyed the store, which was a chaotic mess from our battle against the Harmacist and the crow-faced lab techs. There were supplies strewn across the floor, and whole sections of shelving had been blown to pieces. A lot of the structural damage was already starting to repair itself, just as I'd suspected would be the case, but the boxes weren't gonna pick themselves up, and there were still bodies that needed to be disposed of. "We're gonna start with a mop bucket and a little bit of light reading," I said, reaching through the fabric of space to retrieve one of the new items that had been deposited into my subspace storage system. It was a fat 3-ring binder, with a cheaply laminated cover that read Blanket Fort D Operations Manual. Chapter 27. For the next several hours, Croc and I worked tirelessly, writing tipped-over shelving racks, mopping up spills and blood, and disposing of bodies. There were a shocking number of bodies, though taking care of those mostly fell under Croc's jurisdiction. The mimic enthusiastically insisted on it, actually. The dog explained that the backrooms would eventually absorb the physical material, its exact words, but that it was much easier and quicker to just consume the corpses. After watching Croc unhinge its jaw and swallow the first dead tech like a starving anaconda, I decided to leave the mimic to it. I already had enough nightmare fuel to last me several lifetimes. I took several breaks to read through my new operations manual, which was chock full of useful information. Although it looked like a 3-ring binder, stuffed to the brim with sheaves of loose-leaf papers, it was actually my Blanket Fort interface, serving much the same function as the progenitor monolith, except for my personal safe space. By simply opening the binder, I could view a staggeringly long list of available resource materials and usable square footage. The interface portal even granted me access to a set of interactive 3D schematics, which allowed me to manipulate and even reconfigure the space as I deemed fit. I couldn't use the manual to instantly fix all the broken shit lying all over the place, but I could change the location configuration of the various rooms as well as arm, disarm, and rearrange all of the traps inside the store, which was a damned nice perk. On top of the traps, the store had several other security features and passive benefits. Turned out, the building had a rudimentary spatial core, though it was called a progenitor nexus relay, and within that core were several unique relics, though they were labeled as bindings. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't find a way to remove those bindings, not that I really wanted to, but it seemed possible that I could add compatible bindings to the nexus relay, granting the space some portion of their powers. The first binding was a healing skill similar to my newly acquired pharmacist scales, but way better. It was like pharmacist scales on steroids and applied on an industrial level. The space had its own health pool and mana reserve, and the unyielding foundation binding passively restored and mended damage dealt to the structural property itself at a rate of 100 health per hour, which was insane, until I realized that the store had 14,200 health, which perfectly matched the overall square footage. At that rate, it would take 142 hours, or just under 6 days, to totally repair the store from catastrophic damage, which was significantly longer than it would take to bring me back to full health, even from the edge of death. On top of unyielding foundation, the store had 4 active abilities: Cornucopia of Plenty, Stasis Halo, Banhammer, and Cannon Fodder, all of which were fueled by the store's rather impressive mana reserve. Although unyielding foundation only regenerated the physical structure itself and not the items contained within the store, Cornucopia of Plenty did. It would only work for items that came with the store and not additional materials brought in later, like relics or artifacts, but still. For the rest of my time in the backrooms, I'd never have to worry about food, Mountain Dew, well, Peak Dew, technically, or finding a toothbrush ever again. Even better, that also meant that once the pharmacy recovered from the firebombing, the health, mana, and stamina potions would regenerate as well. Which meant I now had a near infinite supply of life-saving medicine, which I'd be able to mark up and sell at a steep profit to intrepid delvers. I say near infinite because there was one small catch. Unlike unyielding foundation, which passively regenerated the store's health over time, Cornucopia of Plenty was an active ability that required a small degree of oversight. Inside the Blanket Fort interface manual was a comprehensive list of every single item that came stock with the store, including total item quantity, the mana regeneration cost, and the regeneration respawn time. I would have to actively manage my inventory and reorder items as they sold. Thankfully, Regenerating the items drew from the store's mana pool and not my own, but the store had a limited mana reserve to work with, even if it was vastly larger than my own. The more magically or materially complex the item, the more mana it cost to make. I could generate a bottle of water for as little as 2 mana, while a beefy man frozen TV dinner cost around 10. The health, mana, and stamina elixirs cost the most by a country mile, at 200 mana a pop. The store had a total mana pool of 7,100, which meant, in theory, I could manufacture 35 elixirs a day. Doing so would completely drain the magical reserves, however, which I needed to power all of the store's other abilities. There was one other significant catch. Each item in the store inventory also had a max stock value listed in the binder, and I could never generate more of any given item than that value at any one time. In the case of elixirs, that number was 20 apiece. The max stock limitation quickly deflated my dream of an endless surplus of cheap potions, but as long as I stayed on top of the store's inventory management system, I'd be golden. Stasis Halo's effect was rather straightforward and didn't require any forethought or oversight. As the owner of the superspace, the store was built to protect me at all costs while I was within the confines of its walls. Anyone inside the store who was stupid enough to launch an attack against me, whether it be physical or magical in nature, would instantly be trapped within a temporary stasis field, which would petrify and immobilize them for an entire minute, simultaneously nullifying any hostile magical effects in play. That was more than enough time to kill them or throw them out on their asses, depending on what mood I was in at the moment. The only drawback was that the spell burned through an epic amount of energy, which meant that it could only be used about 3 times before the store's entire mana reserve dwindled to 0. It was a solid protective measure, but the system could be overwhelmed and eventually overloaded if enough people decided to launch an attack on me all at once. Of the 4 active abilities, Banhammer was the most complicated and basically served as an iteration tool. I could create a series of rules for the space, no attacking others, for example, and anyone who performed that action would instantly be teleported to a random location on a random floor that the space was connected to, via a doorway anchor. I could create any number of rules that the store would passively monitor and enforce, restricting things like stealing, damaging property, or even cussing. Not that I'd ban anyone for cussing. I fucking loved to cuss. Honestly, people often criticized me for my colorful language, saying that it demonstrated a lack of articulation and imagination. That was a direct quote from my youth pastor, but to my mind, there were few words as flexible or versatile as shit, ass, and fuck. The innumerable ways they could be twisted and strung together to form complicated and nuanced expressions were like poetry when wielded by a true master. Chuckle fuck. Assface. Doucha waffle. Shitstick. Cockwomble. A work of art, each and every one. Though I made it a point not to take the Lord's name in vain. My parents raised me Christian, and although my dad had a mouth like a drunk sailor, he'd paint my ass black, blue, and red if he ever heard me blasphemy. As cool as those bindings were, however, none of them even came close to the last and greatest binding of all, Cannon Fodder. Cannon Fodder. Uncommon binding. Cost, 1x relic. Common